So we are now about to move beyond Mendel, beyond Punnett squares specifically. Punnett squares are going to be of limited use to us from here on out. So we're moving into chapter 14, which is all about human genetics, mostly. First, before we kind of go into that, just want to make sure you have the proper term for the thing that you've seen already, which is a karyotype. Karyotype is that thing that I think probably one of T.H. Morgan's graduate students figured out, which is where instead of having to actually sort the chromosomes, you just take a picture of the whole mess and then cut out the pictures of the chromosomes and move them around and sort them by parent size. And then, in fact, for lots of human genes, we know exactly where on the human chromosomes, 1 through 23 and a half, I don't know, we consider the sex chromosomes the 23rd pair. We know exactly where they are. And so you can go get your karyotype done by a genetic counselor and find out certain things about your risk factors for certain genetic disorders. And they do that generally by sort of identifying the banding patterns. Like you can see on this one, right, that there's different patterns, different bands that correspond with different alleles if you study them enough. Us being not trained, all we can tell about this person is the dude, right? X and Y means it's a male. So that's karyotypes. We'll look at a human gene map a little bit soon, just because it's kind of interesting to see some of the genes we've mapped. But now let's talk about the way we're going to kind of move beyond the Punnett square. The way we're going to kind of move beyond the Punnett square is with what are called pedigrees. Pedigrees, once you really understand basic genetics, pedigrees turn into really kind of a better tool than a Punnett square to start to track a particular trait through a family. A pedigree is basically a family tree with certain graphically coded information. Very simple. In a pedigree, and you probably already know this to some degree because you've probably seen this, but basically squares are males, circles are females. Squares are males, circles are females. What is it if I take a square and a circle and I connect them with the horizontal line? What's that?
Are they like married or something?
Well, it could be. They don't have to be. What it means is basically they produced offspring. Right? Don't have to be married. Let's be as PC as we can. We'll call it childbearing union. But here's where you got to be careful that you are following the rules of drawing pedigrees. Because when you draw those offspring, you want to make sure you draw them correctly. You might be tempted to just drop the vertical line, which is correct, and then say, all right, we got boy kid and girl kid. That's a different story than you want to be telling, right? That's not legal in any of the 50 states. You got to make sure there's corners, right? You got to make sure the siblings have sort of a right angle there. That shows their siblings. So that's the basic code to a pedigree. Then a lot of times we are using a pedigree to trace a certain either disorder or just trait. And a lot of times that trait or disorder is recessive. So whichever thing that we're interested in, whether it's a genetic disorder or a particular eye color or whatever trait it is, if the individual has that trait, the one we're looking for, we tend to shade them in, right? So a shaded square or circle means they have the trait. Sometimes you'll even get enough information where they half shade some of them, which means they are heterozygous for that trait. But most of the time, they'll just give you the shaded ones and make you figure the rest out. Simple enough? Grab a piece of paper and let's try one. There we go. Let's just start with this story, which is actually my in-laws. Take the story of my in-laws and their eye colors and create a pedigree to match, shading blue-eyed individuals. And we're going to assume for this pedigree that eye color is as simple as brown eyes dominant to blue eyes. The reality is a little more complicated. But read that, create the pedigree, shade in the blue-eyed individuals. And once you get that far, you can start trying to puzzle out phenotypes. In other words, what two letters, which two B's, we'll use big B for brown eyes, little b for blue eyes, which two B's do each of these members of my wife's family have? Really doesn't necessarily matter left to right, kind of which branch of the family goes on which side. I tend to usually do it left to right. Whoever's mentioned first goes on the left, right? And then I move my way to the right, but it's fine either way.
Excuse me, interruption. Abby Trusty, would you come to the attendance office, please?
Inside or underneath, square or circle, either one is fine. Looks like most folks got the whole thing laid out. And they're just working on genotypes. Anybody need more time just for the pedigree? Everybody has it all? Okay. So here's what my pedigree looks like. That's what are the grandparents' names? Frank and Marie, right? Frank and Marie Standard. And then we got John, Dick, this is Uncle John, this is my wife's father, and this is Aunt Pat. Then we have John and Diane and Haley. Dick and Nancy have Jan and Melanie. And then, okay, Claire, Adele, Jake, and Annie, twins. So, with those blue-eyed individuals shaded, where'd you go from there? What's the easy part?
Shaded.
The shaded ones, what are they?
A little lowercase b, lowercase b.
So, Aunt Pat, Aunt Diana, and Haley. Oh, wait. Annie. All blue-eyed, so we know their genotype right away. Now, it's the same trick, and we'll be using this trick throughout genetics. When we have a recessive kid with dominant showing parents, what do we immediately know? The parents both have to be heterozygous, right? So absolutely, because of Aunt Pat, Frank and Marie are for sure both heterozygous. Because of Haley, wait, do we know, John? Yeah, some of you might have been thinking, as people sometimes do, well, oh, I mean, she could have gotten both little B's from mom. No, genetics doesn't work that way, right? Well, the way it works is one allele from each parent. So yeah, for sure, one little B is from Diana, but the other one has to be from John. That's how that works. And so we can do that same thing here. She's got two little B's, but he has to be hiding one because he gave one to Annie. Good. Anything else we can tell? Anybody else we can identify? How do we know these three kids are all heterozygous? So for sure they have the big B because they're showing brown eyes. But why is the second B definitely lowercase? Because Patricia only has little B's to give. So whenever she has a kid, that's what she's given the kid. So the little B for sure from Patricia. So three carriers here. That is what we call them sometimes. When it's a recessive trait, we call someone heterozygous a carrier for it. Now we know these people each have a large B. Is it possible that either of these are carriers? Do we have any way of telling? Not really, except that I married one of them. That one. So that's me. And I have blue eyes. And we have two lovely children. Isaac, who has brown eyes, and Nora, who has blue eyes. Now what do we know?
Well, when you marry is a carrier.
The one I married is a carrier. Yeah, she's got a little B because of Nora. Nora has two little B's. One came from me for sure because that's all I have to give. But the other one must have come from her. Anything else? These two you're talking about. Yeah, one of them, but we don't know which. So it's like, these are question marks. But like one of them for sure, there's a little B in there. I don't know if that's the proper way to do that, but that, yeah, that's true. That it? Anything else we know? One more. We don't know Melanie because she doesn't have kids, but how about Isaac? That kid got my little B, right? I had two little B's, that's all I got. So that's what he got. So hopefully this shows you kind of how we are going to be moving beyond the Punnett square. Instead of drawing out a square for every pair of parents and their kids' possibilities, we're going to be looking at real families or hypothetical families and tracing certain traits through and knowing that each kid gets one allele from each parent is going to be enough to be able to puzzle things out without Punnett squares. Does that make sense? It needs to, because from here we start going into patterns of inheritance that are more complicated than just big B, little b. Now we start getting into, real human genetics, which is almost always more complicated than that. Okay? Any questions at this point? Cool. We are going to save elf mating for tomorrow. And I'm going to kind of just give you a little break here. Do go ahead and get out your second guided reading paper. And I'll give you points for that.